Hi everyone, welcome to the Keeping Your Business Together in a Crisis live stream webinar series. This is part 16. It's a PPP loan and forgiveness Q&A. This series is produced by the Boulder Small Business Development Center to support businesses in Boulder County as well as the rest of the state through our TechSource program. We are one of 15 SBDCs in Colorado, and our center is hosted by the City of Boulder. We are part of an amazing network of local, state, and national strategic partners that can help you during these challenging times. And if you're dialing in from Steamboat or Pueblo, feel free to go to www.coloradosbdc.org to find the local SBDC near you. And we all do the same things. We do consulting that's confidential at no cost to you. We do workshops and trainings, and we do connections to resources. We are recording this session at 10 o'clock a.m. on Wednesday, July 29th. This is actually the fourth time that Dan and Brian are speaking, so if you want to go back and listen to any of the other 15 presentations, they are on our website, which is www.bouldersbdc.com. You'll receive a link to the recording tomorrow, and you'll also be able to go to our homepage and watch any of the webinars, including the one from today, tomorrow, or the following day. And also please note that we have everyone on mute, but we will be taking questions. So a lot of you have dialed in because there's something specific that you need. We're going to allow plenty of time for that today. So go ahead and put those questions in the chat, and Jamie and I will take turns after this to after Dan and Brian speak to help filter those questions and try to get as many answers as possible. And Jamie will say some of this at the end of the presentation. She's co-moderator, and we are partners in crime. So now I would love to introduce our amazing subject matter experts, Dan King and Brian Ormsby. They have been working, for months now to really understand what's going on with PPP and EIDL. They've helped their own clients. They've helped SBDC clients. They've really, it's a lot to understand, and there have been a lot of changes, and so we're so grateful they're willing to do this again. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dan and Brian, and we'll get started.
Cool, thanks, Susie. So mainly we're going to do questions and answers today. I have a couple things I want to cover just because I think they're kind of hidden in there. So I'm going to share my screen here. And once I get it set up, okay, everybody can see my beautiful blue screen? Hello, hello?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. Yeah, just a couple things that are kind of in the rules and maybe a little bit buried. So we wanted to point them out. And one of them has a lot of math, so I did a couple slides because it's easier to look at the math when you have some numbers in front of you. I think one of the things that Brian and I would say that the rules that came out last month made it much easier for people to get 100% forgiveness on these loans. And if you're in a situation where you're not sure that you're going to get 100% forgiveness, you should probably, hopefully we answer your question today, but you should probably talk to one of us because there's lots of ways to look at this and lots of opportunity. One of those opportunities is what I'm calling the mathematical safe harbor. It's not a safe harbor that's spelled out in the rules. It is just how the math works now that they've expanded the forgiveness period. So if everyone remembers, in the beginning you had 8 weeks and you had to spend basically 2.5 months worth of your historic payroll in that 8-week period, 75% of it to get forgiveness. Well, things change. Now you have 24 weeks to spend basically, as you can see on the chart, it's basically 10.8 weeks of payroll that you got, 2.5 months divided by 12 months. So you have a lot longer to spend that amount of money, so it changes how the math works. The other thing they changed is it went from a 75% of it had to be spent on payroll to 60%, so that lowered it too. So essentially the way it works is that the number of weeks of payroll that you have to expend during this 24-week period at your historic rate comes out to 6.48 weeks. So you can have a lot lower average weekly payroll during this 24-week period and still spend a sufficient amount in payroll to qualify for 100% forgiveness. I have a little thing there that 6.48 weeks divided by 24 weeks is 27%, and that'll come in on the next slide. So how does this work? Let's take a for instance business. In this first example, I'm saying I have a business that had to reduce their payroll and their FTE count by 48%. So they basically have a little bit more than half the staff that they used to have. Well, guess what? If you're at around 52% of your historic level, the numbers are going to work out for you to get 100% forgiveness. And as I have them displayed here, 24 weeks times at 52%, if you're at 52% of your historic, that's going to come out to essentially 12.48 weeks of your historic payroll. 12.48 weeks, now you have to hit it with the FTE quotient because you reduced your staff. So 52%, that's going to come out to 6.48 weeks of your historic payroll. So guess what? You've now spent enough in payroll to qualify for 100% forgiveness. Now, again, you have to spend the balance of the PPP on qualified expenses, but now you've got 6 months to pile up those rent payments and those utility payments so they can be significant for most people. And then here's my 27% again. 52% by 52% is 27%. It's the same number. It's the missing dollar, if anyone knows that old puzzler. But 52 isn't a magic number, just how the math works out. There's a lot of ways a business could hit this. You could have a business in this second one that I'm showing here, who their weekly payroll is at 70% of their historic, but they had to reduce their FTE count by 60%. So they're already at a 40% quotient. Well, guess what? The numbers will still work out for them. They'll still be able to make the appropriate spend over the 24-week period and get full forgiveness. So that's just something to know about how the numbers work. You have the advantage to file for forgiveness anytime during this 24 weeks. So you can keep going until you hit your magic number and file for 100% forgiveness. So that's the mathematical safe harbor. Sorry, a lot of numbers, but hopefully you get the gist of it and you can figure out your example and if that helps you. There's just one other one I want to point out, and this is actually is a safe harbor that's spelled out in the rule. And this is the one that I'm calling the government order safe harbor. Basically, they said in the new rules that if your business is impacted by a government guidance or requirements, then you have a safe harbor in terms of the FTE count. The language is most specifically spelled out in the loan forgiveness applications. And the one I have here, and I'll just read the highlighted part, is right from the loan forgiveness application. And it says the borrower is exempt from the reduction in loan forgiveness if it was unable to operate at the same level of business activity due to compliance with requirements or guidance. So it's a yes or no question too. It's not, nobody in here is saying, well, I reduced my staff by 50% because my business was reduced by 50% because I could only have that capacity in my restaurant. It doesn't say that. It says if your business was unable to operate at the same level, any reduction is not the same level, at the same level, then you're exempt from doing the FTE calculation. You still have to spend the payroll money in an appropriate way and spend all the PPP money on the appropriate things that you can spend it on. But if your business was impacted by a government requirement or guidance, you don't have to do the FTE calculation. Now, I want to just warn people not to get too cute with this. Clearly, I don't know many businesses, and Brian and I talked about it, I don't know many businesses that didn't have their business model interrupted in some way by requirements or guidance from the state or the city of Boulder in this area. I think that speaks to the vast majority of us, and many of us could make a case. The warning I want to give you is, if you get too cute, you're going to make a case. Your bank may even approve it, but some point 6 months down the loan, when the SBA is doing the final improvement on forgiveness, they may come out and say, wait a minute, that's not what we meant. Now, we understand what they mean now, but they may provide additional guidance. So so have a good faith estimate that yes, my business was clearly impacted, and I think you'll be okay. The other thing I'll just quickly add is that the language says it has to be a requirement established by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Director of the CDC, or OSHA. Well, the rules that came out by the SDBA further define that to say, well, you don't have to directly have an OSHA rule that says you had to reduce it. You can have both indirect compliance and direct compliance. So you can have a state rule that said you have to reduce your capacity. And because the state guidance was based at some level on the federal guidance, we're going to count that as good enough. So if you read this and think, geez, I got to go find a memo from the OSHA telling me I could be at 50% capacity, you don't. The language that was in the proclamation by the city of Boulder, if you're in the city, or the language that's in the state guidance is good enough, and you'll have to include that. So I probably dwelled on these too much because I find them fascinating, because everything about PPP is fascinating. But I just wanted to point those out because I think that they're not 100% clear and that some people might miss them. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Okay, Jamie, would you like to start the Q&A? Thanks for clarifying that, Dan.
Sure. So we're getting a lot of questions, but let's see. I think one of the big ones is if people can go back and apply for more funds from PPP if they've already submitted an application.
Yeah, so the guidance on PPP says that you can only have one loan. So there isn't anything in the guidance that says that you could reapply for a different loan. Now, with that said, I would certainly call your bank and see, because all they can do is tell you no, but I am pretty sure the answer will be no. If you applied for original PPP and you underestimated what the funds should have been, or if you applied for the original PPP and you got bad guidance, that's unfortunate, but I'm pretty sure the answer is going to be no. But asking your bank that question is not going to hurt anybody.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's right. You had your bite of the apple, and if you got it, that's what you got. Now the window is still open for people who didn't get a PPP. I think that August 5th is the date, so there's still an opportunity for some people to get in. I've had a number of people ask me, so what's going to happen with the new congressional bills? It's like we're not going to guess. Who knows what's going to come out of Congress or get signed by the president, and when it actually gets signed, then we'll respond to it. But we're not going to try to guess at what that's going to be at this point.
Awesome. So guys, when do you think that the lending banks will release their forgiveness applications?
A couple weeks ago, I had heard the target date was August 1st. I think I've recently heard August 15th. I have heard some rumors that some of the smaller banks are actually accepting applications. Whether they're able to process them on the backside with the SBA is unknown to me. Sometime in August, but I don't think we have any more information than that.
Yeah, I actually received an official notification from my bank that, and they just said mid-August. They didn't give a specific date, and I think that's generally true with most banks. I did hear from one client that their bank was going to accept their application, but like Dan said, we don't know if they're going to do anything with it once they get it. They have 60 days from the time they receive the application when they open the window to make a determination to send it to the SBA, and then the SBA has 90 days to respond to that.
Great. So I know you guys did a webinar a few weeks ago, so there's some questions about anything that might have changed since the last time you guys presented.
Yeah, that's a good question. We try not to go over old material. I think Dan summarized the things that have been illuminated since our last webinar, but there are no other official changes to my knowledge.
Yeah, I don't think so either. That they have not released anything new on the website, and that's where we would get the rules. The last one was like the 25th or something. It had something to do with fishermen or something. The 25th of last month. But there has been no official released guidance. I have a couple areas where I think my understanding of some things have changed. Brian and I talked about one this morning about how you would calculate a reduction in pay for salaried employees. And my most current thinking on that, or understanding of that, is that it's similar to how you do it for hourly employees. So previously I thought, you know, if you had somebody making $50,000 a year as a salary, if you were not paying them $50,000 going forward at this point, that would be a reduction, and you would have to worry about that 25% reduction number. My understanding now is that you can reduce a salaried person's hours. So you could put them on less than full time, and as long as you're paying them at the same rate, it'll work out the same as it works for hourly people. So that's probably in the weeds way too much for many people. But if that's something of interest to you, that you've had salary people who have reduced work hours, that may be something you want to talk to us about.
Awesome. Can you guys cover, and I know you've covered this in the past, but can you cover how 1099 employees can apply for forgiveness?
Yeah, so and this was a real misunderstanding in the beginning, but it was cleared up pretty quickly after PPP came out. If you're a 1099 employee, then you apply for forgiveness on your own behalf. The company, if you're primarily employed with another company, then it's not their responsibility nor their right to apply for PPP forgiveness on your behalf. You must do your own. So you still have a window, you know, a couple more days. I think it's about 5 business days before the window closes. So if you have not done that, you know, please contact your banking institutions and see if you can get into the window. If you contact your bank and they're not taking applications, there are organizations that are taking applications. You know, please contact somebody from the Boulder SBDC, and we will try to connect you with someone who's still accepting applications.
And I just throw in on that, so it really was, there was a lot of difficulties with the original protocol and procedures for independent contractors, and they've all gone away. So if you find your copy of the easy application form, there's a series of questions you have to be able to answer, like 3 choices that you have to be answered. If you can answer truthfully to one of those, you can use the easy application. And the very first question is, if you're a self-employed independent contractor or sole proprietor, bang, you can use the easy form. You don't have to do anything with FTEs. You have now up to 24 weeks, so because you can't pay yourself at a quicker rate than you paid yourself historically, but now you have enough time to consume that money, all of it on payroll, over the 24-week period, or less than that, because you got about 10.8 weeks. So it's very, very easy. If you're an independent contractor or sole proprietor, it would be inconceivable to me that you wouldn't get 100% forgiveness. You can go right to that easy application form. It's easy. It really is. Easy is not a misnomer. It's a very easy form. So you'll answer that first question and you'll fill out the couple-page form and you're all done. Very few calculations.
Great. So a follow-up question to that is, do banks have their own applications, or should that easy application or any other SBA ones work for every bank?
Yeah, the banks are supposed to be using the form that was provided by the U.S. Treasury, the easy and or the long form, depending on your situation. Now, the banks may have some different application processes of documentation they want to see. But the applications are supposed to be centralized for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. That's the biggest difference is going to be the documentation, how much they require, and banks will have different theories on that. But the applications have been out now for over a month, and they have made no additional changes or modifications to them for that month period. So I don't think they're going to change. I think the process of why they're waiting is because the SBA hasn't established the back end of that process with the bank. So the application form's out there. You can fill it out and send it to your bank, but I don't think the SBA is ready to, because they'll do that all electronically. I just don't think they have that portal set up yet.
Awesome. So if you apply for forgiveness and you are not given 100% forgiveness, is there a process in place to appeal the bank's decision?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a specific process. I think there should be. I mean, you have to call your bank and talk to them. That surprises me, particularly with the new rules. So I would think that person should maybe talk with one of us and go into the details on that.
Yeah, and remembering that it's in the bank's best interest to forgive this loan. I mean, a 1% loan managed over a period of time is not in the bank's best interest. So, I would think that even if you put in an application that was not for full forgiveness, that your banker would probably go, hey, let's take a look at this. Can you find any other numbers? So I think they're going to be helpful to try to help you get forgiveness. That makes sense to me. Now, again, every bank's going to be a little bit different, but as Dan said, full forgiveness of the PPP portion of the loan is something that you should have an expectation of getting.
Here's the only caveat, and this was something that got changed as the rules went on. So the caveat is the idle advance money. Again, in the beginning, we thought this idle advance money was a grant, happy day, you got it, quick stimulus, go spend it. And as it turned out, the idle advance money that you received became bound to the PPP money that you may have subsequently received, and will no longer be forgiven. So if you got an idle advance, 100% forgiveness on the PPP loan means you're going to get 100% forgiveness of what you got for the PPP, but you're going to owe the idle advance as a PPP loan. So, I mean, what are your choices now? You can either pay that back now, or that is going to be a 1% interest loan over a period of time. And there's, as we know, there's two periods of time. It could be a 2-year maturity. It could be a 5-year maturity. But the banks are unfortunately going to get stuck with a lot of these, because frankly, if I had money at 1% interest for 5 years, well, I'm not very inclined to pay that back quickly. That's cheap money, and I need cash right now. So unfortunately, because of the way that worked out, the banks are going to end up with a lot of these on their books, even if they're technically giving everybody 100% forgiveness.
Great, thank you. So then there's a question of whether or not you can put out more than one application to different banks. This person has experienced some bad customer service at various banks, and then it's really hard for them to know if it's actually going through to.
I had 3 out at one time. Early on in the process, I had 3 out. One with 2 big banks, who I'll leave nameless, who there were issues with customer service. But then I finally went to one of the online lenders and got everything approved and took my loan. Now you can only, or took my PPP loan. Now you can only take one of those PPP loans. So if you eventually get 3 approvals, you can't take 3. You just decline the other ones when they come in. But yes, don't hang around. If you're with an institution that doesn't seem to be moving quickly, find one that does and get it through them.
Yeah, I had a customer in particular that applied with a big bank and had customer service issues, so they applied with someone else. And then within 3 days, the money from both of those applications showed up in their account, and then they had to turn around and give one back. So yeah, multiple applications is okay, but you can only take one loan, and that's very specific in the guidance.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we're getting some questions. There are a few questions filtered through from sole proprietors. This one is asking if they're a sole proprietor and they already got a loan for their employee. This particular person spent that money in 3 weeks. They're asking if they can now apply for a loan themselves to pay for themselves. So they already got one loan. Can they apply again, this time just to pay for them?
Yeah, so this goes back, I think, to the very first question we asked. Is it, right now, all the guidance we have is that you can only have one PPP loan, and so I certainly would call my bank and say, hey, is there any way I can amend that loan or something like that? I am pretty positive the answer is going to be no, but it's worth the question. So for an organization, only one PPP loan is available to you. If your original loan was lower than you thought you deserved, my general answer is, unfortunately, that's probably where you're at, and there are no, are no other options. But certainly, call your bank and at least make them tell you no.
And then the only other little wrinkle I'll throw in there is that, yeah, call your bank and talk to them, but maybe there is a yes answer in there. So it's one PPP loan per entity. So if I had a business and I had 10 employees and I filed for a PPP loan for that business and got it based on the W-2 wages I paid for my employees, but if I, as a person, was not an employee of that business, if I took my returns as 1099 income or K1 income, and I hadn't included that amount in the entity's application, then I could, I think, file for an individual as an independent contract application. But you can't double dip. So in my example, it wouldn't be double dipping because it wasn't included there. I wasn't a W-2 employee, but so now I'm filing individually for my own income. So there is a possibility you could do that. Again, don't double dip, but the situation may be such that you could get a second one but it's for a different entity.
Great. So this is a bit of a longer question, but I think it could apply to more than just this person. So it's a specific question about on the PPP forgiveness form. So they have a question about a specific question, which is the number of employees at the time of loan forgiveness. See where they can tell the period they chose to calculate their FTE count for the initial loan. They have a specific period that they would like to use, which is January to February this year. And then they don't see where they can add the period that they want to use for forgiveness, which is April to July this year. So they're basically wondering, how they can put that information in to show, what they're comparing.
I was going to wait to see if Dan had an answer to that because I'm not sure I do.
Well, so I'm just not sure I'm following all the details of the question. So your choice for, so let's start with the historic period. There are some choices for what historic period you could use for your historic FTE count, and those are set choices. You don't have a lot of options with those. Seasonal people have a little wiggle room, but there's a couple very defined periods that you're going to use for your historic FTE count. And then there's going to be an FTE count for your covered period, and that's pretty well defined, except the end date's not. The beginning of that covered period is going to be the day you got the money, the clock starts ticking, or if you pay bi-weekly or weekly, you can move it to line up with one of your payroll periods. That's a minor difference. So it's going to be essentially the beginning of when you got your money, that clock starts ticking, and the end of that covered period is going to be 8 weeks or whenever you decide to pull the trigger and file the application. That's going to be the end of your covered period. It can't go beyond 24 weeks. And it can't go beyond the end of this year. There's going to be some people who get loans who aren't going to get the full 24 weeks. I think it cuts off at December. So too much detail there probably. So you can't just say, well, I want to pick whatever covered period I want. The covered period is going to start the day you got that money essentially, and it's going to end when you say it ends and when you file that application within the 24-week period. And that's going to be, that date that you file that application is going to be the date that you can say, yep, and my FTE as of this date was now back up to what it needed to be, or was at whatever number it needs to be. So I don't know that I've answered the question, but I think those are the choices.
Yeah, I think that covered it.
Yeah, it looks like that might have covered a couple of other questions in here too, but it looks like
Let me throw in a point too. So I'll throw in a quick point that we made earlier, but I'll point this out to people. So one of the problems that we first thought was coming out with this 24-week period is this end date when you have to get your FTE back up with 6 months. 24 weeks is 6 months. 6 months from now, if you had to wait to the end of 24 weeks, who knows what conditions are going to be then and where your FTE count is. One of the magic or the good things that has happened, because now you get to choose when you're going to end your covered period, is you can choose the date that, geez, I've got my FTE back up right now. I've spent the money in an appropriate way. I'm filing the application now. And that's the date that's the end of my covered period. And then if something happens next month and things go bad again, you have to lay off 2 people, you've established your end date for that covered period. So it's something to be mindful of and watch as you spend the money. And when you've got enough money spent that it all fits in the right boxes and you're lined up for 100% forgiveness, you can choose that date, and that becomes that target date for when you had to restore your FTEs by. And if you've got the FTE number back up by then, you've got it, and you fulfilled that part of the requirement. So anyways, I digress, but yeah.
Awesome. I'm back. So Dan and Brian, what I was going to ask before is there's some confusion with the EIDL loan. When you guys were talking about the having to pay back the $1,000 if you got the EIDL advance, can you just explain a little bit more of how the EIDL relates to PPP and how the advance is a loan or a grant tied into PPP forgiveness?
Yeah, so it's tied to the PPP loan, but it has no avenue for forgiveness at this time. So let's say you're a 10-person company, you applied for EIDL, you got the advance, you got $10,000. Then you applied for the PPP, or maybe you applied for the PPP first, and then you got PPP funding. The forgiveness application is for the PPP funding only, and the EIDL advance, the $10,000, still sits out there as an unforgivable obligation against the PPP loan at 1% over the term. So once your forgiveness application for the PPP portion is resolved, that EIDL still remains out there unresolved. And at that point, you have to either pay it back or roll it into the 1% loan either over the 24-week period if you're an early recipient, or the 5-year period if you're a later recipient.
Yeah, that's right. I guess I'll only throw in that from a logical standpoint. Why does it work that way? I don't think there's any logic behind it. It wasn't what we thought how the program was going to work. We don't really understand why they made the program work that way, but that's the way they made the program work. So it is what it is. Will it change in the future? Who knows? I actually saw it was reported that the Secretary of Treasury, Mnuchin, said, why don't we just forgive all these loans at one of the congressional hearings? And so who knows? Maybe something like that happens, but you can't bank on that. Right now, that's how it works. The advance, which was supposed to be a grant, is not an advance if you got a PPP. If you never got a PPP, if you only got the EIDL loan and the EIDL advance, guess what? That advance money is advance money. You keep it, you don't have to pay it back. But if you got a PPP, that advance money changed to be tied to the PPP.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting point, is if you did not receive PPP, but you got the EIDL advance is, that is the only situation where it is a grant.
Okay, thank you guys. I know there's a lot of confusion with how things have changed with EIDL or the communication, so I think it's helpful to clarify some of that. So there is another question about a sole proprietor. They're wondering if they can take their PPP payment and reinvest the money into the business, or do they have to pull the money out of the company's bank account to pay the sole proprietor?
So you have to use that PPP money to pay yourself. So you have to pay yourself, And then once you paid yourself, then that money's your personal money. And you know what? You want to reinvest it in the business? Reinvest it in the business. You want to go out and buy groceries? Go out and buy groceries. It's but you have to pay yourself. It you have to pay yourself first. Then you've completed the requirements of the PPP program, and that money is your personal money to do with as you see fit.
Yeah, and the rules are very specific. Whether it's during the covered period and it's forgiven, or after it becomes a loan, if you do not get forgiveness, the money can only be used for payroll, rent, and utilities. So regardless of whether you use it during the covered period and you get 100% forgiveness, or you turn it into a loan later, your uses of that money are finite. So if you want to invest PPP money into your business, the only way to do it is the way Dan described: pay yourself and then invest those funds back into the money as personal funds.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's something we talked about earlier that got clarified in the last round too, that PPP money can only be used for the permitted uses. And if you use it for a non-permitted use, it's fraud. And that's the language that they put in there. It is fraud. So you can only use it for payroll, utilities, and rent, and certain mortgage instruments. But then once you've used it for payroll and it's been converted to somebody's personal income, then it's personal income. So yeah, you have to convert it first.
Great. So originally, this person's asking about audits for over $2 million for PPP loans, that it was anything over 2 million. Has anything changed with the criteria for being audited to receive PPP loan money?
Yeah, well, let me clarify that a little bit, because I think what was said is if you got a PPP loan over $2 million, you're going to get audited. It did not say if you got a PPP loan for less than $2 million, you would not be audited. It's just that your mandatory audit isn't there. So they have the right to audit any PPP loan for any amount. So if they feel like a loan needs to be audited, they will do so. I would expect that if you're under $150,000, your application is forthright and there's nothing on there that doesn't pass the smell test, that you probably will not be audited. But again, they can audit any loan. If you're over $150,000, then there might be some percentage of audit that they decide that they're going to look at later. But there is no guidance on that other than every loan is auditable. Those over 2 million will be.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with this piece, but this person is asking if you're aware of any restriction for getting 100% forgiveness for PPP and then later getting the full tax credits for the Family Medical Leave Act, because they do offer some tax credits for that. So I don't know if you know how they play together.
There is language about that. That's something I haven't looked at for probably 2 months. I'd have to go back. I'd have to go back and look at that language, because there is language, and I looked at it first. My recollection is that if you use PPP money to pay somebody for a leave, you're not going to get the tax credit. In fact, I think that is correct. That if you use the PPP money for a leave, in fact, you are not, I think my recollection now is you are not allowed to use PPP money for a leave. You have to pay that out of other sources and then apply for the tax credit at the end of the year. I'm pretty sure that's right, Brian. Is that ringing bells? But it's been a while since I've looked at that.
Yeah, I was pretty sure that if you put them in a category of FMLA, then and you use the PPP funds for that category, then that wipes out the tax credit. So you need to segregate those things. And I think, Dan, you're correct. But I wouldn't stake my life on it, because like you said, it's been a couple of months since I've seen anything on that. I'd have to go back and look at it again.
Yeah, there is language. We could follow up on that. So yeah.
Great. So this is an idle question, but they kind of seem to be peppered in with the PPP. Can idle funds be used to pay down the corporate credit card for materials purchased before the funds were received?
My interpretation of that is yes, because that is a operating expense. So idle funding is very specific that it is for business operating expenses. So as long as that qualifies, whether it is a current or past debt, you may use it for that.
And I would agree with that interpretation. And I would just add that credit card is on your balance sheet as short-term debt. It's not long-term debt. So you cannot use idle money to do things that change your long-term debt situation. But that's not what credit card is. Credit card is working capital for most of us. And there is actually language in there that does say you can use idle money. If there's things that had to build up over the last couple of months because you're waiting for the idle, it essentially says that that would be a permitted use too. So I would agree with Brian that yes, you could, you know, everything's within reason. And I'm sure there's some way for somebody to violate to make that not permittable, but I would think in general, yes.
Jamie?
This person is asking a clarifying question. They're saying, Dan has said that once we reach our obligation, we can apply for loan forgiveness on that day with those stats. But if the bank is not accepting the applications yet, can we fill it out now and then send it in when they accept applications? Or do we need to wait until they open the application and apply as of that date?
Here's my best advice, and I've been told I could turn out to be wrong. So my best advice is I would go ahead and send it to them. I would fill out the application, I would send it to them. I would say, I know you're not taking it, but I'm sending it to you because I'm done, and this is the date, this is the effective date on which I'm submitting my application. And then hopefully when they do open up that thing, that formal application, and you apply, you can still say, yeah, but my effective date for FTE was here. I have been cautioned that the SBA may not agree with that. But if you're not worried about changing your FTE count, then go ahead and wait a little bit. But if it's important to you to establish that date, I would go ahead and submit it to them. I say, I know you're not taking it, but I'm submitting it. Here it is. So this is my effective date. And then hopefully that argument will be good for you later on. I can't guarantee you that because I've been told sometimes the SBA says, no, it doesn't matter to us. We're doing it when we took it. But so that's my best advice.
Yeah, I agree with Dan entirely. And my understanding, I talked to my banker because again, they're not accepting applications here for another couple of weeks, is that one of the reasons they're delaying acceptance of applications is that they're actually afraid that the guidance is going to change on them, and then they're going to have a problem processing applications in the 60-day window that they have. So they're trying to extend the window so that they understand all the rules before they go into this. So I would agree that I think it's a prudent course of action that if your application date, end date is prior to your bank accepting application, set your application up at that date, send it into your bank, make it a record that you did send it. Don't hold it and send it later. Send it to your bank so that you have a record. Even if they send you an email saying we're not taking applications at this time, you can go back to that email and say, I submitted it on this date.
Great. Dan, are you okay with sharing your slides when we send out the email?
Sure. Do I remember how to do it? I practiced. What slide do we want to look at, or just
no, somebody's asking if we can.
Yeah, I'll send them to you. You can show them out. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I think, Jamie, are you seeing any new questions that haven't been covered in the list?
I've seen one from earlier that related to interns and how those might be able to be calculated into FTE count. Let's see, and the dates are different for the interns. They work for different hours. Let's see, would they do the same calculation for them as they would for a regular employee? Or how would that work if they're interns?
Yeah, so if they're unpaid interns, then I think you're out of luck. I think you have to be paying them.
I think they are paid. They're just on different
Okay.
hours.
You'd have to have them in your system as a paid employee, whether they're intern status or not, they would be a paid employee. So they would have to be a W-2 employee in your system, and then they should be calculated like any other employee.
And again, there's two methods for how you calculate an FTE, and you get to choose which one is to your advantage. So you can look at those two methods. I won't go into them now, but run them both ways and use the one that works best for you.
This person is saying, as a clarifying thing, that they actually make up their own hours for the interns. Like the interns make up their own hours. So that might get complicated.
It could be, but I mean, you would, because of the way the FTE calculations are made, you would have to take those hours over the covered period and push them into your calculation. And like Dan said, there's two different ways to do that. So whether, I mean, they're determining their own hours, they're at the beginning of the week, they're saying, hey, I can give you 12 hours or whatever the case may be, you know, that would be the number that gets pushed into your calculation.
Great. Okay, so can employers use PPP money to pay a bonus for those returning to work?
Yes. That's a real simple question. Yes.
Unless you're an owner operator, and then you cannot pay yourself a bonus. You can only collect exactly what you paid yourself last year. You can't give yourself a raise, you can't do anything. But regular employees, absolutely, you can give a bonus.
Well, this is just a fun question. They're asking, Dan, if you played that accordion behind you.
Never.
I was thinking the same thing.
I don't have any of those things. As some of you who may know me, I used to run the Boulder Outlook Hotel, and we had a blues club there, and had a lot of great live blues music. And I've collected some of those things over there. I play no instruments. I mean, I'm pretty sure that one was actually given to me by Otis Taylor, who used to bring things in out of his basement and says, this will look good on a wall. So I have lots of memorabilia like that, but I don't play any of it.
That's awesome. Okay, well, we're getting a lot of thank yous, by the way, for you guys, and a lot of appreciation for all of your help.
I'll repeat what I said in the beginning. If you're really struggling and don't think you're getting 100% forgiveness, you should talk to one of us, because we should look at it, because the rules are, there's big places to look at for these rules to make them work in your favor.
Yeah, and honestly, unless you're shut down and not paying anyone, you should be forgiven.
Yeah, that would be the exception. If you haven't been able to start up and pay anybody, then you've got a problem.
Great. This question says, if you get your PPP forgiven, then will this reduce our overhead rate?
So this, I'm assuming this would be either in a job cost environment or a government contracts compliance environment. Overhead rate is based on expenses against your contract values. So the forgiveness actually becomes revenue, which is not part of an overhead calculation. So it should not affect your rate in any way.
So this person has kind of a clarifying question about the reinvesting money into the business. So they're wondering how they can calculate what they pay themselves if they have been reinvesting money into the business and not paying themselves. Now that business is down so low, their outgoing funds are higher than the incoming. So how can they now calculate the payroll for themselves?
So I assume this is an owner operator. So the calculation is actually very clear. It is based on what they made in 2019. And that's where that comes from. So if you, taking a really simple calculation, if you made $60,000 in 2019, you would have paid yourself $5,000 a month. So that becomes the benchmark of what you can pay yourself under the PPP. Is basically that $5,000 a month. Now, Dan has a calculation that shows that rather than it just being 8 weeks, it's, what is it, 10 point?
It's 2.5 months divided by 12. So it's 10.833 weeks or something. Yeah.
So, and that's, as an owner operator, you are stuck with whatever income was 2019 number. That could be good or bad or ugly, but that is the number that is the only basis for how you can be paid under forgiveness.
And in theory, that's what you should have received, because it should have been the basis of what you reported on the application. So it should be the same amount you received. So frankly, I understand what this person is saying, but to get the PPP forgiven, you basically got to cut yourself a check for that amount, convert it to income, and then you can give it back to the business. But you've got to convert it to income.
So here's a short question. If your full-time FTE hours go down, does that mean you can't use the easy form?
No, it doesn't. You have to read through those specific things. But so if you're, again, there's this government order safe harbor. So if my FTE went down because I had to comply with government regulations, then you don't have to make an FTE calculation at all. And there may be some other ones too. It's really easy. And if anybody doesn't know where that form is, we can show it to you. But there's basically a series of, some of them have multiple questions, but there's 3 boxes. And if you can fill out one of those boxes, you get to use the easy form. So I'm not going to read through them now. We can certainly send that out. But there are ways that you could even have an FTE reduction and still be able to use the easy form.
Great.
So I'm thinking this depends on the period that they decided to go back to, but this person is asking, are there any exceptions in PPP forgiveness for independent contractors who were W-2 during the first half of 2019 and then self-employed during the second half?
Yeah, that gets a little trickier. So, if you're looking at applying for a loan now, you actually can use both of those figures. You can use your W-2 number and your self-employment number, and it would be the additive of the two. Now that becomes, like I say, it becomes a little complicated in that, but it is possible. When you think about someone who is in S-corp status, where they have W-2 employees, maybe they're on a W-2 and they also have pass-through income, technically they can use both of those figures to calculate the number of funds that they're requesting from PPP, and then that would become the basis of how they would calculate their forgiveness, but it's based on those historical numbers for 2019.
Great. Okay. On a side note, I just want to let the person know that's asking if Brian is being held hostage in someone's attic, that no, he has worked really hard to build himself an office. Brian, you want to let everyone know you're okay?
I've been working on this office all summer, and I still have some trim to do, and other than a countertop and a chair, there's nothing up here now. So yeah, it does look like maybe someplace that you would hide away a hostage. But we're going to put some things on the wall here and make it a little bit more presentable soon.
If you need an accordion, I can lend you one.
All right. So I think that we've pretty much covered all the questions. So thank you guys so much for doing this today. There were so many questions still, and this is an ongoing thing. So really appreciate you guys continuing to stay up to date on everything and helping inform people. So we have been getting some questions about follow-up and if they can get access to these recordings. So to let everyone know, yes, we will send out an email tomorrow with link to the recording today. I'll also include links to those loan forgiveness calculators that we mentioned. All of our webinars in this 16-part series that we've done now are located on our website. So it's just bouldersbdc.com. So if you want to go back and listen to any of them, I definitely encourage you to do that. Dan and Brian have been so awesome to do 4 out of the 16. So very grateful to them for that. Also, just wanted to reiterate what Susie said at the beginning, that there are 15 SBDCs in the state of Colorado. So we encourage you to go to the state website to find your local SBDC. It's coloradosbdc.org. So we can help get you connected to your local center. If you do have questions for Dan and Brian that you want to follow up with, we do offer consulting through the SBDC and Boulder SBDC. So we just ask that you fill out a little bit of paperwork, then we'll get you connected. And if it's a quick question, we can just get you connected after this. So shoot me an email. I'm happy to respond to whatever your questions are and get it to Dan and Brian. So. But thank you guys again. Susie, did you have any other closing thoughts?
No, just thanks so much to everybody, and thanks for a great interactive session. Dan and Brian, you're amazing, and yeah, it's awesome that you're doing this for people, and it is confusing. I think it's hard to get this information if you're not looking at it all the time, and so it's so cool that you're here for them. We'll post also a link to. There is some questions about applications, like how to find the application. So we'll put that in there as well. And Dan's slides we can add. But other than that, we'll end it a couple of minutes early. And thank you guys. And thanks, Jamie and everyone.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.